Okay, here we go. Okay, so Jameson, I like to say that Jameson is one of my favorite Devops Days DC souvenirs. I go to all the Devops events and I always meet some really special people. And so Jameson is a really good speaker. I just really love their talk on spoons. Jameson's in Buffalo. Jameson has written comic books and does a lot of work for social justice, and is a panelist on Greater Than Code podcast. And let's see what else I got. We got that you're a Rails engineer. And anyway, so I am very excited about this talk today because it's very relevant to all of us now. And go. We're good.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen now so everyone can see. Everyone see my slides?
Perfect.
Sweet. All right, cool. Thank you so much. My talk is called Achieving Inclusivity Through Remote Work. We're remote right now. Thank you all for inviting me like right into your living rooms and offices. It's very cozy inside, so I appreciate it. Judy just gave a great introduction, but I also have an introduction. My name is Jameson Hampton, but my friends call me Jamie. I'm from, and in fact, I'm coming at you live from Buffalo, New York, the home of bad sports. This is a little bit less true than normal actually right now. Fun Buffalo fact. But the Toronto Blue Jays are the only MLB team in Canada, and they can't play in Canada right now because of the pandemic, so they are playing in Buffalo. You can't go see them, but they are here, so that's exciting for me. I'm representing TrueLink Financial is where I work. I actually just started there a couple of weeks ago. It's going really well. So yeah, that's where I'm a senior Rails engineer there. And like Judy said, I'm also a panelist on Greater Than Code, which is really cool. And you can find me on Twitter at JBBash. You can, be my friend, send me pictures of your pets, send me stuff about tech, anything you want. Love to hang out with people on Twitter. So that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about remote work. And this is from the Stack Overflow Developer Survey in 2019. So as you can see, these percentages are probably a little bit different. Then I think it'll be interesting to see what the 2020 chart looks like. But even before everything that happened, which I'm going to talk about later, you can see like not everyone was working remotely, but we got like 12% of people, not 12 people. 12% of people full-time remote, and a lot of other people doing at least a little bit of remote. So this is like relevant. And in fact, in the 2017 Stack Overflow Developer Survey, they also asked about people's like top priorities when they were looking for a new job, what was important to them. And 53% of people said that remote options were a top priority for them. So this definitely is something that's like already been on people's minds in the tech industry. Personally, I've been working remote. I've been working like 80 to 100% remote for my whole career in tech, about 7 years. And when I tell people that, I normally have a conversation that goes something kind of like this. And I know from working with a lot of other remote people in my career that these kind of responses are kind of annoying to a lot of people that work remote. And I kind of understand why. I get that. Like, people who've never worked remote ever sometimes have a tendency to act like it's kind of like a walk in the park, and it's really not. It's like a regular job. You have to get just as much work done. In fact, I feel more guilty about taking breaks when I'm working from home, because like in an office, water cooler chat is a thing that will happen naturally. And it can be isolating not having that kind of chat, and it makes me feel weird about kind of taking breaks. This is a cartoon from The Onion. I relate to it a lot though. But like ultimately, overall, my response is normally more like this. Because I really love working remote. It's something that really works for me, and it helps me do my best work. I would not be able to do my best work if I couldn't work remote. And so really what a lot of this talk is about is like why that is. So the first thing I want to do is kind of talk about the benefits of remote work in general for anybody. This is probably like not news, but I think it's like kind of interesting to think about consciously at the beginning. So, you know, you have more flexibility when you're working remote. Maybe you want to start a little bit earlier, work a little bit later. That's normally fine. Maybe you have like specific obligations at a certain time of day, like you have to pick up your kid from daycare. It can be much easier to kind of work around that. And not having to commute is also part of like having more flexibility. Personally, this is a big one for me in Buffalo because A, we don't really have very good public transport here, and B, I don't have to dig my car out in the winter out of the snow, which is nice. But like there's a lot of places too where people have very long commutes, and so this will be a big benefit. It gives you the freedom to work from anywhere you want. This is a little bit less true right now, maybe when we can't travel, but in other times, I do a lot of traveling, and I found that it really kind of opened up opportunities for me in that. Like, for instance, if I wanted to go down to Texas and visit my family in Austin, I have family there, I wouldn't have to like take a week off of work. I could just work during the day when I would normally work and have the evenings with my family and not have to like waste all my PTO on that. Not that it's a waste to hang out with my family. With productivity, your mileage may vary a little bit. Some people find it really difficult to work from home and not get distracted by like regular home stuff, the dishes, the laundry. You know, remote work isn't everyone's preference, and that's okay. But and obviously this one's out the window right now, actually, because right now we all have lots of distractions at home, more than normal. But for me, at least, I find that my productivity is a lot better when I'm working from home than in an office, because I don't have like my coworkers around me, you know, talking to me a lot. I don't have as many interruptions to my work, and I can kind of like focus in and get like heads down work time. Plus, this one's kind of simple, but like just being able to work from a space where you feel comfortable is like pretty big. So I don't want to understate that either. So again, that list of benefits was like in general, but I've used the word benefits a lot, and I will continue. And I think the word benefits is kind of interesting because it can mean two different things, kind of. I read a whole bunch of different definitions of the word benefits, and I really like this one. The word advantageous or advantage came up in a lot of them as well. And I think that's kind of interesting when I'm talking about like kind of two different kinds of benefits. So the first category is maybe what you think of with the word. It's like a perk, something that's nice to have, something that makes your life a little bit better than it would have been otherwise. But there are people for whom remote work is more than just a little bit of extra convenience. And there's kind of another way that we use the word benefits when you talk about like, you know, your benefits from work. It's something that you need because it makes it possible to do something that wouldn't have otherwise been possible. And so it's cool to think about what benefits you want to give people, but I think that it can be more helpful or important to like think about what problem or barrier you could be solving for people. And I want to talk about diversity, because when you're talking about what benefits are really valuable, that might be different things for different demographics of people. So I think it's important to kind of discuss like, well, why is that important? And the obvious first reason is just because it's the right thing to do to like not discriminate against people. So I hope we can agree on that. But it also makes your team stronger for a couple of different reasons. First of all, like having different perspectives on your team makes you better at anticipating problems. We're not actually that great at anticipating the needs of people who have very different needs than us. I do a whole talk about user empathy that kind of touches on this. But so having lots of people on your team with different needs kind of spreads that out. I like to tell a story about, this was like a team, I read about this, that was working on those like automatic hand dryers. You put your hand under it and it turns on. And they rolled out with these hand dryers, put them in bathrooms all over the place. And then they found out that they didn't really work well on detecting black skin, which was, I think, really embarrassing, because not only did they not like think of this, but it also is very obvious to me that they didn't have any black people on their team, or they would have like noticed that. So like, it's really good to kind of have different people noticing different things. Also, like in general, the tech industry kind of has a diversity problem. A lot of people hire for culture fit, and it means that they just have like, for some people at least, it means that they just have like everyone on the team is the same, and they want to hire more people that are like the same. So not only does that mean that they don't have those different perspectives, but it also means that they're not always getting the best candidates because they're only considering like a narrow segment of the population. And obviously there's like really talented people that aren't in that segment. So, and like if those people are overlooked and having trouble finding work, like, you know, you could hire them and they'll make your team better. I also think we talk about D&I a lot, but diversity and inclusion aren't the same. Diversity is the idea of having a team where not everybody looks the same, which is important, but inclusion is really about making those people feel integrated on your team. So if you have diversity without inclusion, it kind of alienates underrepresented folks because it indicates that you really care more about like looking good with your diversity statistics than like supporting your employees. And ultimately it's going to lead to less diversity because underrepresented people aren't going to want to stay at your company. But on the other hand, inclusion fuels diversity because A, you are going to retain people, and B, you're also going to be attracting more diverse candidates in the future. Because underrepresented people talk to each other and find out what companies are good at this and then go to work for those companies on purpose. So this is a graphic. The arrows are pointing the wrong way actually. But in general, like on the left, we have like diversity because not everybody looks the same. But then on the right, we have inclusion because everyone is integrated together. So I want to talk now about like some of these different demographics and like what I was getting at with the benefits being different for different people. So I do kind of want to put a caveat, like there are lots of different kinds of chronic illness and disabilities, and they all have different symptoms and challenges and needs. So I'm trying to talk in ways that are pretty general. That said, I will disclose that like personally, I have pretty severe anxiety disorder, and that's a big part of why working at home has been so critical for me, and it's really improved my life a lot. So I'm gonna also speak from kind of my experience on that. So accessibility concerns. Like I just said, different disabilities need different accessibility accommodations. But it's likely that the best ones are going to be at someone's own home where they kind of have control over all those variables and can make themselves feel like as comfortable as possible. And this is related to accessibility, difficulties getting around, but it's a little bit bigger than that too. For me personally, before I was fully remote, I used to miss a lot of work because I have days where like I wake up and I feel too bad to get out of bed and like get ready, but I can still actually like work. And in fact, sometimes working is really helpful for me because it's distracting me from whatever else I'm going through. And so being able to work just from where I am is really helpful. And this is related to, I've already talked about flexible working hours. They're a perk for everybody, but some people need them for much more tangible reasons. If I have a panic attack early in the morning, you know, I pretty much need to go back to sleep for a couple of hours to be useful at all for anything. So if I can start a little bit late and then work a little bit late, that's like a whole day where I can still work instead of like having to call in because I knew I was going to be late. So that works for me and it works for my company. In addition, if you have like frequent doctor's appointments, that also requires a lot of flexibility from your employer. Energy conservation. Judy actually mentioned this in my intro, but there's this idea of like spoon theory is this concept that we all have a limited amount of energy that we can spend in a day, and the spoons are kind of the unit of energy that you can say like, oh, I'm out of spoons because you've run out of energy. And this is something that's really common in like communities of people who have chronic illness because it really reflects the way you have to ration energy in order to get through a day. So like if you have chronic pain, for instance, you're using a lot of your spoons early in the morning just to get to work. And, you know, if you could conserve those, you would have more energy to get your things done at work and also in your life. So that's pretty big. Also, a lot of people who struggle with illness have good days and bad days. And like, maybe you just don't want people to see you on your bad days. For me, that means if I have a panic attack at home, it kind of sucks. You know, it's not a good day for me. But if I have a panic attack at work, it's much more awful because it feels embarrassing for people to like see me in that way. So just like not having to turn your camera on if you're having a bad day preserves a lot of privacy for a lot of people. This is another one where like underrepresented minorities is like an extremely broad category, so I have to be kind of general. But I do have some kind of general thoughts. And I think energy conservation is relevant again. It's less common to use spoon theory for this than for chronic illness. It was originally a metaphor for the chronic illness community. But I do think underrepresented folks have to use more energy at work for several reasons. Code switching is one. We talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work, which is nice in theory, but actually most people don't do it in general, because like, of course, the way you talk to your coworkers is different than the way that you talk to your friends, which is natural. And it's much more true if you're not part of like a majority in group on your team. This might look like if the slang you'd use with friends who are from your same ethnic group is different from like a mixed group. For me, the way I talk around a group where everyone is queer is kind of different. And there is an energy cost associated with kind of deciding which mode you're in and making those decisions on the fly about how you're going to communicate. Microaggressions is something I could do an entire talk about. But basically what we're talking about here is like small, indirect, often unintentional discriminations against minority groups. And these are definitely things that can happen in the office. This might manifest like off-color jokes that might offend people, making assumptions about other people. Like when people assume that I'm straight and make assumptions about like my partner, that's difficult for me. Getting misgendered is a really big one for me. That happens a lot. So these things are small. It might not be someone trying to like intentionally be a jerk to you, but they still add up and take energy. I think this is related to microaggressions, but just the idea of fitting in with people around you is really relevant. I talked to someone at a conference once. Actually, I think it was Devops DC, a really great conference. But he told me a story about working at a series of jobs where he was the only Latino, and he felt like none of his coworkers really understood him. And then suddenly he worked at a place where everyone was remote, and so there were people from all over the world on his team. And it wasn't like he had the same background as people, but because everyone was different, he felt like he didn't stick out in a meaningful way. And it was like a good feeling for him. And I thought that story was really beautiful, actually. Resources can be an issue too. We talk about like working to make money, obviously, but actually it can be pretty expensive to work. Like think about someone who comes from an underprivileged background and they just did like a tech boot camp and they're looking for their first job in tech. You know, maybe they can't afford a nice wardrobe to wear at the office yet. Maybe everyone in the office like wants to go out to lunch together and they can't afford to go and buy lunch. Even like transportation to and from work can be a problem for some people. This is kind of part of it, but I think that not everyone always talks about this, and I think that it's really kind of interesting and important, which is this idea of location-based diversity. People who come from different places or live in different places or like have different backgrounds have these perspectives that are going to make your team better and more thoughtful, like I was talking about earlier. And not everyone has the resources to live in big urban areas, and that's where a lot of tech jobs are. There's a lot of reasons for this. The biggest one is that they just can't afford it. It's extremely expensive to live in like New York City or San Francisco, which is where a lot of startups are. Maybe someone has family obligations and doesn't want to move away from where their family lives. And you know, different cultures place different kind of emphasis on family obligations. So it might be much more important to someone who comes from a different background than you. Or maybe someone lives in another country, which would be awesome diversity to have on your team, but they can't actually come to the United States because they can't get a visa. Really, these are factors that could affect anybody, but I think that they could disproportionately affect underrepresented folks in the workplace, because maybe it's more likely that we come from underprivileged backgrounds or have different cultures or like come from different places. And so I think it could be more relevant for these kinds of people. I do want to talk specifically about the trans community for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm trans, and talk about what you know and what's important to you. I do think it's relevant though, because the number of trans people in tech is growing, which means the likelihood that you're going to be working with a trans person on your team, or already are, or more than one trans person, is also growing. And so understanding this perspective will help you be a good coworker. I also think that the reason that there are so many trans people in tech is because not all industries have like remote work is even a possibility. And there are reasons that remote jobs can be uniquely attractive to trans people. So I want to talk about some of those reasons. Transitioning is really hard in general. It's a huge change in one's life. It's a change for the better, but any period of intense change is very difficult. Also, you have to worry about if people are going to be respectful of you, which is very stressful. But even if you are in a good situation where like everyone at your job wants to be respectful of you, which again isn't always the case, unfortunately, but even if it is, there are still unique challenges. Clothes are a big one, actually. A lot of trans people have a lot of baggage about their wardrobe and what is like appropriate for them to wear. That can make it really hard to navigate a business casual world. Also, most people have to essentially replace their entire wardrobe when they first come out, and it's really tough to do that all at once. It's kind of something that happens over time. So like newly out trans people actually don't own a ton of clothes a lot of times. Using the bathroom, also huge baggage. It's very hard to explain how stressful it is to use the bathroom when you're trans. You might have a little bit of an idea of this from like the news when people are talking about like bathroom laws and stuff. I have a talk that I'll recommend at the end where a friend of mine really tries to go into some of these things and like make it kind of understandable, that I think is really great. But in general, just like if I can use the gender neutral bathroom in my own home, that like saves a lot of stress for me. You know, as if you're feeling self-conscious about your appearance isn't like bad enough in general, transitioning often comes with kind of like awkward teenage phases where it can feel very uncomfortable to be seen every day. This is especially true for people who are on hormones, because it basically forces you to go through like another puberty when you're an adult. I'm actually going to share something that I don't normally, a little bit more personal than I would normally share in a talk, but I think we're all friends here and I'm excited about it. But I am not on hormones, but I got my prescription and like I got my first dose of hormones today, and I'm probably going to start tomorrow. So this is something that I'm going to be going through very soon. It can be a relief to turn off your video if you're just like having a bad day about how you feel about yourself. And it also helps keep your transition more private. I'm pretty open about my transition, but a lot of people find it really important to be able to kind of like emerge from a cocoon as a different person. Even well-meaning coworkers are sometimes going to mess up on like name and pronouns. It's much easier to practice and get it right over text-based communication, because you can kind of be more thoughtful and catch yourself before you mess up. At my last company, everyone was super respectful. Nobody ever misgendered me on Slack. But then when we had in-person meetups, people would slip up just by accident, but it made it really tough for me. Also, correcting people is very anxiety inducing, and that's also easier to do over text than like speaking up in person. Just like not all trans people are on hormones, not all trans people have surgeries, but many people do. I had my top surgery a couple of years ago, and I was really worried about like having enough sick time to recover from it. But I ended up being able to take off like less time than I expected, because I couldn't really get up and walk around. But again, I could like work from my bed, and people weren't perceiving my physical form when I was recovering, which was great. All right, so we've talked a lot about the benefits, but there are cons of remote work too. There's already a lot of articles and talks that kind of go into all the challenges of remote work, give you like tips for working remotely effectively. Now that we're kind of in the situation that we're in, the market is literally flooded with these kind of articles and talks, which is great because it's really nice that people who are already good at remote work want to help support people that are brand new to it. But actually the phrase already good at remote work is kind of like the key to what I want to get into, which is that there's a remote mindset. It's not always easy, and it doesn't come naturally to everyone. It takes work, but it's also a skill that you can practice and get better at over time. But a healthy remote environment doesn't just happen. It's something you have to be intentional about, and you have to think about what a healthy remote environment looks like to you and like strive for that. So I want to talk about like some tips that are kind of specific to some of the things I've been talking about. And I think text-based communication is a big one. Not all communication is text-based when you're remote, but like a lot of it is. We're on Slack every day, and we talk to our coworkers that way. I think this slide will have tips that could be helpful for everyone, but they're like particularly helpful for people like me who struggle with mental illness, in my opinion. So here's some good things about text-based communication. Messages just exist, and you can go back and like read them again in the future. One of my anxiety symptoms is memory lapse. So it's really helpful to be able to review like exactly what people said, so I remember exactly what it was and the context around it. Being put on the spot with questions can also be anxiety inducing. So like an async culture helps a lot with that. But even if someone needs an answer like now and not later, I still get to think more about how I'm going to word it when I'm typing rather than talking. But there are tough things about it too. My anxiety makes me worry a lot about tone, and like I read into people's words sometimes, which can be really hard to convey over text. I try to encourage people to like err on the side of over communicating. You know, tell me explicitly if your inquiry is urgent or non-urgent, especially if you're texting me after hours. People feel silly about clarifying tone, but I think it can be really helpful. I also think emojis help, which sounds silly, but there's a lot of nuance in them sometimes, and you can really kind of convey tone that way. My old company had an emoji on Slack that we kind of like put in ourselves, WIC, which is an acronym that stands for when you can. This is actually something that my dad and I made up when I was younger because he had like a habit of texting me like, call me. And then I would like freak out because I thought something was wrong, and I would call him and he would tell me like a funny story that happened to him. So we invented when you can for him to kind of indicate to me like, I would like to talk to you about this, but it's not about something serious. And we used it at work, and it was great, actually. And that's really about giving context for messages. You know, if my boss says, hey, can you hop on a call right now? That's like the worst possible thing for my anxiety, because I'm like, why? Is it urgent? What happened? Did something bad happen? Am I in trouble? There's like 1,000 ways that you can read into that. And so if you say instead like, hey, can you hop on a call right now? It's time sensitive, but it's not an emergency, and it relates to this project. It takes you a couple more seconds on your end, but it cuts out a lot of anxiety on my end. You're already kind of doing the first step to becoming a good advocate by listening to me talk about all this stuff, because getting a sense of some of these different perspectives is really like the first important step to do. But I do have some actionable tips also. When some people are remote but others aren't, that can be a really challenging situation, because the remote people miss out on conversations that happen in person. Sometimes that means socially, you might just not get to know people as well, but that sometimes causes you to get passed over for opportunities at work. Sometimes people will even get left out of conversations that are relevant to projects that they're on, not maliciously, just because people like meet in the hall and want to talk about it, but that makes it really hard to be effective on those projects. These are all things that underrepresented folks in the workplace already struggled with, so remote work, if done wrong, absolutely can make that worse. But like, if you notice someone is being left out, it's really easy to just speak up and say something. You know, oh, you want to talk about the project? Yeah, but actually, we should probably wait until Jamie can hop on a call with us too, and then we can all talk about it. This one might be a pet peeve for me, but I hate being on a call where there's like a bunch of people in one room together and then just a couple of people have called in. It is impossible to keep up with that conversation as a remote person. There's lag, there's noise, you can't be heard over other people. It literally makes me feel more left out than like not being invited to the meeting at all. So at my old company, we used to do this when I was new and I hated it. And eventually we started a policy where everyone had to phone in individually. So even if there were 10 people at the office, they would all sit with their laptops and put on their headphones and call in. And so from my perspective, it felt like a video call where everyone was calling in. And then I was like on a level playing field with everybody else. Again, I could not possibly cover all microaggressions. But in general, a good way to support underrepresented folks in your workplace is to like get better at identifying microaggressions, because A, then you can not do them, and B, you can stop other people when you notice them doing them. I'm just gonna kind of call out a couple that are like really specific to some of the things I've already mentioned. Please don't comment on people's appearance. There's really no reason for it. It only makes people uncomfortable. I don't mean like, I like your new haircut, but if someone's looking under the weather, don't tell them they look sick. You know, maybe they have some acne, you don't have to comment on it. Maybe they're wearing pajamas, don't worry about it. It's easy and just costs $0 not to say anything about it. Also, some people might want to keep their video off. A lot of places push for like everyone having their video on during calls. I actually really get that. I do think there's value in it. It fosters more of a relationship between coworkers who can't be together all of the time. But if someone like wants to keep their video off occasionally, there's probably a reason. Don't make them feel weird about it. So correct pronouns are not just for when you're with somebody. This is something that I have a lot of anxiety about. If there are people who are in person in an office and then I'm remote, I spend a lot of time worrying if I'm being misgendered in the office when I'm not there and like can't know that it's happening. Just don't let that happen. It's disrespectful even if the person isn't there to hear it. It's also bad practice for when you are with them. It makes you more likely to mess it up in front of them, which is gonna make people feel bad. I do want to put a caveat on this one. It's pretty personal. Not every trans person is going to feel comfortable with you correcting people. You should probably ask if this is something that your coworker like wants you to do. But in my experience, many people will. I certainly do, personally. So I've said a couple of times that I was going to kind of get back to talking about I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the situation that we're in right now, because it's very relevant to this whole working remotely idea. A lot of people are working from home for the first time, so welcome if you're one of those people. But in a lot of ways, I think this is like a huge revolution. There have been people trying to advocate for remote work for themselves, for like all of the reasons that I've been talking about, like why remote work would help them personally. And a lot of people were told by their companies like, oh, well, we can't. We don't have remote. We don't want remote people. We can't do it. Well, it turns out that we can, and we are, and we're figuring it out. And I think that that's kind of like a box that's getting opened, and I think it's going to be hard to put it back in the box. For people that really have been wanting to do remote work, we can't isn't going to be the same kind of acceptable answer as it was before. And I think that that's going to do good for some people. On the other hand, you also are having people who are like working from home for the first time and being like, well, this sucks. Well, guess what? Of course it sucks, because suddenly becoming remote against your will in the middle of a pandemic is not a healthy remote environment, which has to be fostered intentionally. This isn't what remote work is normally like. You're not normally under the stress of living through a pandemic. You're not normally stuck in your house all the time with your spouse who's also working remotely and your kids who can't go to school and all of the distractions that come with that. This is not like normal. And I'm worried about this because like I love remote work so much and I don't want there to be a whole demographic of people who tried it in this situation and think it's just like bad now. Because we're living in unprecedented times. And as I say, unprecedented times, you know, we can talk about the future, but it's hard to. It's hard to even speculate about the future because, gosh dang it, we just don't know what the world is going to be like, even in a few months. I've been giving this talk for like 2 or 3 months, and I was saying, you know, we don't know what the world is going to be like in a few months 3 months ago, and I was right, we didn't. And now I have no idea what it will be like in the future. So it's tough. But I think that like, even though we're in a tough situation right now, if we want to be intentional about it, I believe that we can let it change the landscape in ways that are going to help a lot of people long term. If we make a point of integrating remote work as a more standard part of our lives. And I love the idea of kind of being able to pull out a silver lining from this legitimately bad situation. I have a few recommended talks. Understanding spoon theory and preventing burnout is I referenced it at the beginning when I was talking about spoon theory. Judy also referenced it. I gave it at Devops DSDC. This is the video from RailsConf 2017. Things I Wish I Knew Before Going Remote is a talk from RailsConf 2019 by Marla Zasheen. As I said, there's a lot of good talks about like remote tips. I happen to like this one. Trans I for the Cis Ally also called out while I was speaking. It was also from RailsConf 2019 by my friend Julian Fitzpatrick, and really does a lot of work with breaking down some of the issues that trans people face in like a very thorough way. And so I think that it's really helpful if that's something you're interested in. Anyway, thank you for inviting me and letting me talk about this. It's pretty important to me. It's nice to be able to stay connected to people while we're stuck at home. And so I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time.
That was awesome.
Yay! That was so good.
Thanks so
Glad
much.
you liked it.
I cheered for you when you said that you were starting hormones.
Thank you. I literally have them right here. This is what they look like if they're in a box.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's awesome.
I haven't opened the box yet, but I'm pretty excited.
Any questions from the room before we call it for the video?
So I love seeing this because I guess this is more of a comment, so sorry for doing that. But I think it's really like makes sense here. So I started working remote in December before COVID because I took a new job that's like in a remote first company. And I had no idea how much being physically in an office surrounded by people was triggering my PTSD like daily. My mental health is actually better during COVID because now I'm not surrounded by people all the time. So much of what you said just was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I got to think about that. Like that's why I feel better. So thank you.
Well, I'm really glad.
Yes.
All right, thanks.